I'm Tim Moore from just north, the University of Wisconsin, and I work at the Center for the Study of the American Constitution. It's great to be with you.
My name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the Political Science Department at Clemson University in South Carolina. And congratulations on being here. Thanks for your efforts to persist through all of this to participate today.
I'm Jack Barlow. I teach politics at Juniata College in Pennsylvania. And as Dr. Stewart said, thank you for persisting through the technological miracle of all of this and all the challenging circumstances that we all face right now. So thank you.
Thank you. We are Unit 2 representing the state of Illinois. Our teachers are Andrew Trankel and Kevin C. Hansen. My name is KAITLIN O'Reilly and my colleagues are.
Hi, I'm Dominic BUTI.
I'm Charlotte Geyer.
And I'm Emily SPEGEL.
Well, fantastic. It's no surprise that it's question number 1. So I'll read it and then you can begin. The states sent delegates to the Philadelphia Convention to join with other states to, quote, devise and discuss all such alterations and further provisions as may be necessary to render the federal constitution adequate to the exigencies of the Union. To what extent, if any, did the delegates follow their instructions? What experiences of state governments under their new constitutions after independence might have influenced the creation of the Constitution? Do the decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court function as a continuing constitutional convention? Why or why not? You may begin.
Without the ability to tax, regulate citizens' behavior, or trade, the weak union formed by the Article of Confederation couldn't protect or secure the newly independent states. The delegates at the Philadelphia Convention did not follow their guidelines set out by the Continental Congress to purely discuss alterations or provisions for the Articles of Confederation.
However, they could a new document and government that was adequate to make into the Union. By increasing the power of the national government, the nation could run properly as the Articles of Unity was alleviated.
Rules from both the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation were disregarded. After the first 6 weeks, New York was only represented by a single delegate, Alexander Hamilton, despite Article 5 stating, no state shall be represented in Congress by less than 2 nor more than 7 members. In Article 13, it was stated that alterations be agreed to in a Congress of the United States and afterwards confirmed by legislatures of every state. Yet, Rhode Island did not ratify the Constitution until after it was enacted.
Akil Damar states in the Yale Law Review that the Articles of Confederation were a mere treaty whose repeated violation by virtually all states legally justified exit from the Articles if a supermajority of states so agreed, as outlined by the Constitution's Article 7. By disregarding both established law and instructions, the framers prioritized the success of the Union.
While the instructions for the Philadelphia Convention were not strictly adhered to, this was acceptable. The preservation of the Union had to come first. As noted by James Madison, a national and adequate government cannot possibly be affected by the alterations and provisions in the Articles of Confederation, Federalist 40.
However, the 12 states represented in Philadelphia drafted a system that all the states, including Rhode Island, approved with state ratifying conventions. But given history, we realize that the failure of the initial experiment helped the founders to find a more perfect balance between liberty and order in the Constitution they produced in 1787. Jeffrey Tubin.
When reflecting on the previously formed state constitutions, obvious flaws challenged the administration of law in these new states. The 1776 Pennsylvania Constitution was such a radically democratic document that it had inspired leaders of the French Revolution in the 1790s. France took upon ideas of total democracy, as Pennsylvania eliminated all undemocratic checks from their new form of government.
The obvious flaws of the French Revolution disqualifies Pennsylvania's Constitution. Aspects such as fundamental rights, rule of law, representative government, and the right to vote were found across state constitutions. The Delaware Declaration of Rights encapsulates this goal of state constitutions, that persons entrusted with the legislative and executive powers are the trustees and servants of the public.
While not addressed by the Delaware Declaration of Rights, the judicial branch still holds an important role in maintaining our Constitution. The Supreme Court implements judicial review, which they define as a crucial responsibility in assuring the individual rights as well as maintaining a living Constitution, whose broad provisions are continually applied to complicated new situations. However, this does not qualify as a constitutional convention.
According to Article 5, 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes. The Supreme Court's interpretations of the Constitution occur as they are presented with complications or possible changes to the document, whereas conventions are intended to rewrite an element of the document or the document as a whole.
Although the process in which the Constitution was created went against the provided regulations, the framers created what they believed was a document that would meet the full and entire appropriation of every state, and that it may promote the lasting welfare of that country so dear to us all. George Washington. Thank you. We're now open for questions.
Great. Let's, I'd like to go directly, like fast forward a little bit to the Anti-Federalists and their criticisms of the convention, not their criticisms of the Constitution, but their criticisms of the convention itself. Which of those criticisms do you think is most, resonates most with you?
You know, I would have to take the position that Thomas Jefferson did. You know, while he was in Paris, he took the criticism of the rules they created for the convention. He believed that it was a terrible idea for the framers to, as he put it, tie the tongues of the members of the convention in mentioning the secrecy rule, which I agree with. I think it is important and vital to consider the opinions of the people, despite Madison thinking that people are untrustworthy and not educated enough. I think that is important to consider them in the creation of the Constitution.
Also notably, Patrick Henry said in reference to the Constitutional Convention that I smelt a rat because he thought, like my colleague mentioned, that these rules would not allow the people to put in their insight that was necessary to create a nation that would allow these rights of the people to be preserved.
Additionally, the most prevalent concern of the Anti-Federalists was the fear of a strong executive, as they had experienced a strong executive and somewhat tyrannical rule in Great Britain and did not want this to translate over to the US. So this concern was very relevant and very valid to the Anti-Federalists' argument.
Thank you.
Well, may I speak? Sorry.
No, go ahead, Emily. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Well, I would agree with everything that my colleague said. I would still like to bring to light the reasons why the Federalists did bring the Constitutional Convention. In Federalist 21, Hamilton listed off a number of reasons why the Articles of Confederation were inadequate. For one, they couldn't call they couldn't call an army effectively. They couldn't enforce their laws both foreignly and domestically. And they also couldn't enforce their taxes that the states needed to pay the national government in order to run the Confederacy effectively.
All right, thank you.
Joe?
Yep. You've emphasized the point that the people in Philadelphia did not follow the charge they were given, but a majority of them were the people who had actually issued that charge. I believe it's something like 42 of the 55 delegates were members of the Congress of the Articles. So how is it that they reached that conclusion to essentially disagree with themselves?
We can look at some examples such as Roger Sherman. He played an essential role in drafting these influential documents that created the early period of our nation. He approved the Articles of Association, the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. So by the fact that he approved all these documents, it shows that although they initially wanted to have less changes to the Articles of Confederation, that was just not possible.
And I'd also like to add on to my colleague's point that if these men who were members of that Congress that created these rules and then they themselves went against and broke the rules, adds to the point that these men that knew they needed to form a new document and a new government in order to have an effective nation.
So let me follow. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No worries. I would agree with what my colleague said exactly, and ultimately the legitimacy of the Constitution still exists while the founders did break the rules of the convention. As we can see by what historian Brian Chow stated, the legitimacy of the Constitution lies in the eyes of the people. And as the Constitution has been, has really lasted the test of time and has been accepted by the several states and lasted, it evidently did have legitimacy.
Okay, so you cite Federalist 40. Let's think about the opposite side of it, and this is more of an anti-federalist side. That really represents kind of a trustee theory of representation, right? That these guys were entitled to think about the welfare of the people. But what about the anti-federalist point? They should really act as delegates. We sent them to do a specific thing and they didn't do it. So how do you respond to that?
You know, I would actually agree with you, Mr. Ball. I'm sorry, KAITLIN. Patrick Henry said that the government they created would effectually oppress and ruin the people. So I think that I would completely agree with him that the anti-federalist point of view was one that was extremely valid and important to consider. And I think that it's a shame that those men like Patrick Henry and Richard Henry Lee did not go to that convention because they didn't think it was valid, or they might have been breaking the law and going to that convention. And I think that if those men were there, they could have created a constitution that was even stronger than the one that they created at that time.
Although the people weren't necessarily granted the ability to share their specific views at the Constitutional Convention, they still were able to share them in state ratifying conventions. In Federalist 40, Madison said that the Constitution is to be founded on the assent and ratification of the people of the Union, not as individuals composing one nation, but as composing distinct and independent states for which they are part of. So I think it shows that both the states and the national government were represented in our Constitution.
Thanks.
Good job.
Thank you.
I guess I'll start out. I thought your opening statement was very good. I think your reference to New York, where we start out with Yates, Lansing, and Hamilton, and they quickly disappear, and even Hamilton disappears at times. You referenced Amar as the Articles is just simply a treaty. You mentioned the Pennsylvania Constitution. My point is you've sprinkled your opening statement with supporting evidence quite well. I like the way that you've brought in a quotation or a specific reference to. Obviously, Dominic, you're brushed up on Patrick Henry, but also knowing that his fellow Virginian Richard Henry Lee is also in that same camp. I think if I could, and I